The northern woods of Minnesota lay buried beneath an unbroken sheet of white. The snow was so deep it swallowed the wooden fences surrounding the small cabin where Martha Olson had just stopped her car. She turned off the engine and listened to the metallic crack of frozen metal. In the back seat, Elias, her 15-year-old son, sat motionless, his face as pale and still as ice. They had driven 7 hours from the city to reach this place, the family's old hunting lodge, built by Martha's grandfather nearly a century ago, now restored for their first Christmas since her husband's death. When she opened the door, the wind rushed in, sharp and raw, carrying the scent of pine resin and damp earth. The cabin loomed dark and solitary among the trees. Snow draped the roof so heavily it covered half the chimney. The air felt thick, as if the whole forest were holding its breath. Martha sensed something wrong. Not silence, but a deliberate quiet, like a room where someone had just left. Inside the living room, old frames lined the walls. Weak daylight from the window washed over the pale faces of the Olson ancestors, hunters, soldiers, men posing with rifles and lifeless game at their feet. Martha paused at one photograph, 3 men standing beside an upside-down reindeer. But instead of faces, they wore masks made from bone and hide, shaped like goats. That night, the wind began to rise. Martha lit a fire, listening to the wood crack and sigh. Outside, the darkness thickened until it seemed to swallow the glow of the lamps. When the clock neared midnight, a strange sound came from the roof, something heavy sliding across the snow. She looked up, but only soot drifted down from the chimney. By morning, Elias called her outside. Across the fresh snow, surrounding the cabin, stretched a trail of deep, unnatural prints. They were not human. Each mark split into 2 long, pointed toes, like some creature that walked upright. The trail led toward the old wooden shed behind the house, once used to keep reindeer in her grandfather's time. The door hung slightly open, the hinges shrieking as Martha pushed it aside. A faint metallic tang lingered in the air, the smell of iron or blood. On the back wall, beneath melting snow, a message had been carved long ago, its letters crude and uneven. Blood for Yule. She didn't understand the words, but in that moment something stirred in the far corner. A slow, wet breath, deep and animal. Martha stepped back, the cold seeping into her lungs. From the forest beyond, the wind rose again, carrying a faint metallic chime, like Christmas bells, or something far older waking beneath the snow. The snow never stopped. Layer upon layer, it gathered on the roof as though trying to bury the house beneath its silence. 3 days had passed since Martha discovered the strange words carved into the barn wall, and she had not slept through a single night since. Whenever the wind howled through the trees, the sound that slipped through the cracks in the door no longer resembled wind. It was rhythmic, deliberate, like footsteps circling the cabin. One morning, while sweeping snow from the porch, she uncovered something half-frozen beneath the ice, a small, weathered leather journal, soaked and green with mold. The first page, written in a trembling hand, read, Eric Olson, December 1928. Her grandfather. Most of the ink had bled away, but a few lines were still legible. We fed it with blood. The winter goat must be appeased. If not, the snow will never melt. In the margin was a crude sketch of a creature, half man, half goat, with hollow eyes and a mouth torn wide in a grin that seemed to stretch beyond reason. That night, the fire in the hearth burned low. Elias sat near the window, the dim light flickering across his pale face as he stared into the woods, entranced by something unseen. When Martha asked what he saw, He only shook his head. The next night, she awoke to the faint jingle of bells, soft, distant, like those once tied to a reindeer's neck. Stepping onto the porch, she found the sky ink black, snow slanting sideways through the wind. At the edge of the forest, between the frozen trunks, something glinted, a metallic reflection, as though a pair of blood-wet antlers had turned toward her. By morning, the reindeer shed stood open. In the snow lay heavy drag marks streaked with frozen crimson. Inside, there were no animals, only a few blood-matted tufts of grey fur, and those same two-toed footprints driven deep into the frozen ground. Martha tried to reason with herself. Wolves, perhaps, but the thought rang hollow. Something older stirred in her chest, a dread she couldn't name. That evening, she took her grandfather's journal to the porch, intending to burn it. But when she struck the match, the flame flickered and died the instant it touched the page. A cold wind rushed past, and from the crack of the door came a whisper. Hoarse, wet syllables spoken in a language that did not belong to any living tongue. As night deepened, the house itself began to change. The faces in the old photographs seemed to shift, their eyes subtly turning to follow her. Martha felt watched, not from the woods but from within the walls themselves. She wondered, for the first time, if her husband's death, the hunting accident that had brought her back here, had ever truly been an accident at all. By the fifth night, the snow had swallowed the porch. Martha lay awake, listening to the snap of breaking branches, then a heavy thud from behind the house. She rose, lamp in hand, and peered through the frosted glass. Amid the blizzard, something was standing there. It was nearly twice the height of a man, covered in white fur, its body upright, horns black and curved backward. For one fleeting second she saw its eyes, amber, cold, intelligent. Then it was gone. When she opened the door, only wind and drifting snow remained. But across the white ground, leading toward the forest, stretched a trail of deep two-toed prints, and between them, pressed into the ice, was a single mark larger than the rest, the dark imprint of a human hand, splayed wide, like a warning left behind. Morning came dim and colorless, the weak light filtering through a crust of frost on the window. The forest lay deathly still, the only sound a sigh of wind threading through brittle pine branches, like the breath of someone unseen. Martha stepped onto the porch and looked around. No new footprints, yet the snow before the barn door was still pressed low, as though something had stood there all night. Inside, Elias slept heavily, his breathing faint. His face had gone so pale it seemed almost translucent. By noon, a truck appeared on the frozen trail. Raymond Briggs, the lone sheriff responsible for this part of the county, climbed out. A broad, red-faced man, worn by cold and solitude. Martha told him everything. The words carved into the wall, the bells at night, the two-toed tracks. Briggs only forced a smile. He said it might have been a wounded reindeer, or kids playing around. He circled the cabin, jotting notes into a small pad. At the barn, he knelt and touched the tracks. His brow furrowed. For a moment, his face drained of color. But when Martha asked, he only muttered, "Snow distortion. Happens all the time." Before leaving, he promised to return in a few days. She watched his truck vanish into the curtain of white, unease tightening in her chest. Later that afternoon, while cleaning near the stove, Martha discovered a hollow beneath one of the old floorboards. She pried it open and found a small wooden box tied shut with frayed rope. Inside lay a rust-colored knife, its hilt carved with the head of a goat, a scorched fragment of horn, and 3 brittle hoof pieces arranged in a triangle. The stench of decay rose up, thick and metallic. At the bottom of the box, a paper scrap had been glued to the wood. The words were blurred but legible enough. When the blood debt remains unpaid, it will seek the next in line. That night, Elias began to mutter in his sleep. The words spilling from his mouth weren't English. They were low, guttural syllables, chanted like an ancient prayer. Martha shook him, but his eyes stayed closed, lips repeating the same phrase again and again. Under the lamplight, she saw a black bruise forming around his wrist, shaped like 2 long fingers pressed deep into the skin. Outside, the storm gathered. Through the blur of snow, she thought she saw headlights, Briggs, returning. She ran to the porch, but when she reached the steps, the truck stood half buried in snow at the roadside, its lights still burning. The driver's seat was empty. She waded through the drifts, the yellow beams flickering over the uneven road. Near the back of the truck, drag marks cut through the snow, trailing down into a shallow ditch, ending in a dark red stain still glistening warm. Martha fled back inside, bolting the door. The wind slammed against the walls, rattling the windows in their frames. Then came the sound, 3 slow knocks from within the chimney. Clack, clack, daughter. Kali, ka. Not branches. Not wind. Fingernails against metal. She stared upward as flecks of soot drifted down like ash. The knocking stopped, replaced by a long, damp breath echoing down from inside the flue. The fire died with a sudden hiss. Darkness fell over the room, broken only by the thin blue light of the moon seeping through the frosted glass. Trembling, Martha grasped the knife from the wooden box and clutched it to her chest. The photographs on the walls began to tremble softly, as though invisible fingers brushed their frames. One fell. She bent to pick it up and froze. It was her grandfather, Eric Olson, standing in the snow before this very house, holding the same knife she now gripped. Behind him, faint but unmistakable, loomed a tall shadow with backward curved horns, staring directly into the camera. From the chimney came 3 more knocks, closer, heavier. Then, silence. Absolute. Martha understood. The debt her grandfather had written about was no legend. It had come to collect. And outside, the snow kept falling, thicker and thicker, like a white shroud waiting to cover a sacrifice yet unfinished. Christmas Eve arrived with the fiercest blizzard of the season. The wind screamed around the house, like the howl of a wounded animal. Every road was buried under a solid crust of ice, isolating Martha and Elias completely from the world beyond. In the weak flicker of a single candle, the cabin resembled a wooden coffin adrift in a white sea. Martha sat before the cold hearth, both hands gripping the ritual knife. She could no longer tell where the sound of the storm ended and the faint tapping above began. Elias lay motionless on the couch, his face pale and eyes half open, pupils dilated as though staring into an endless void. His skin felt chilled to the touch, and beneath it she sensed a strange rhythm, his heartbeat faltering, stuttering, then pausing entirely for a breath before resuming, as if something else beat alongside his own heart. When the clock struck 12, a sharp metallic sound tore through the storm, from the direction of the reindeer shed. It was not an engine, not a voice. Bells. Dozens of them, ringing out across the forest, echoing through the frozen air until the world itself seemed to fracture under the sound. Martha threw open the door. The wind nearly hurled her backward. Through the swirling snow, she saw a faint glow emanating from the shed. A pale, flickering gold, like the light of candles burning low. She pushed forward, snow dragging at her legs. Two-toed footprints marred the fresh white surface, leading straight inside. The door hung open, moaning on its hinges. The stench of blood hit her, iron-sweet and suffocating. Elias stood in the center of the floor, facing away from her. His body was dusted in a thin white film that looked like ash. Around him, symbols had been carved deep into the ice, linked together by strands of old rope and tufts of animal fur. Martha called his name. He did not move. She stepped closer, and when the candlelight caught his eyes, she saw that his pupils gleamed a pale, animal yellow. Slowly, he raised his arm and pointed toward the far end of the stall. From that darkness came a sound, a deep, wet breath that made the beams above tremble. It emerged. A figure over 7 feet tall, its body cloaked in white fur, horns black and curved backward, its face, half man, half goat, cracked and split with frost, eyes hollow, glowing faintly like embers. Each step it took melted the snow beneath, revealing the dark red earth below. Around its chest hung a string of tarnished silver bells, each one chiming softly as it moved. A slow, solemn toll, like the echo of judgment. Martha stumbled backward, clutching the knife. The creature bent low before Elias, exhaling mist that rolled like smoke. Elias met its gaze, his lips moving, whispering the words. "Blood for Yule." He fell to his knees, arms open as if to receive something unseen. Martha screamed and lunged forward, plunging the knife into the creature's chest. But the world blurred, the sound vanished, and in that frozen instant she realized the truth. Her hands gripped not fur, but flesh. The blade had pierced Elias' heart. His blood gushed warm across her palms. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. The wind died. The bells fell silent. The towering shadow dissolved into pale smoke, spiraling around them both before drifting upward through the roof beams and into the storm. Martha collapsed, cradling her son's body as the warmth drained from it. His lips still moved, faintly, forming the same words again and again. "Blood for Yule." From afar, the cabin flared with a brief light, then went dark. When morning came, the forest lay quiet under the pale sun. A thin column of gray smoke curled from the broken chimney. The two-toed footprints were gone, replaced by a single drag mark stretching deep into the trees, toward the place where, for generations, the snow had never melted. Dawn crept slowly after the storm. The first light of Christmas Day stretched across a forest of white pines, casting a pale glow over the frozen silence. There was no wind, no sign of life, only the faint, colorless sun hanging low on the gray horizon. When Raymond Briggs and the rescue team arrived, the road leading to the property was nearly buried beneath the snow. His pickup truck still lay tilted in a ditch, the door ajar, seats crusted with frost. Briggs trudged forward, each step sinking deep. Ahead, the house stood like a solitary tombstone in the endless white, its roof half-collapsed, chimney snapped in two. The front door hung open, swaying gently in the wind. Inside, silence. Everything was covered in a thick, powdery layer, half snow, half ash. On the table, a candle had burned down to its wick, a thin thread of smoke curling upward. The living room was frozen stiff, The old photographs on the wall hanging crooked, their glass cracked, frames scorched at the edges. Briggs called out for Martha, for Elias, but only the echo of his own voice answered. When he neared the fireplace, the metallic scent of rust and dried blood struck him. Across the floor, dark stains formed an uneven trail, dried, but unmistakably red. In the center of it, a small handprint was pressed into the wood. On the far wall, beneath the frost seeping through the cracks, words were scrawled in a dark, clotted ink. "The debt is paid." Briggs tightened his grip on the flashlight and followed the narrow hallway toward the back. Each step made the wooden floor groan like something alive. The reindeer barn door stood ajar, creaking open as he approached. Inside, the floor was blanketed in snow, but at its center lay a hollow impression, a shape like a kneeling body, surrounded by a ring of crimson. No corpses, no tracks of struggle. Only a soaked pelt of white goat hide hanging limply from a rafter. At Briggs' feet, deep two-toed prints led away, vanishing into the woods. He followed them to the forest's edge. The morning light glared against the ice, blinding him for a moment. Then, between the shrouded trees, he saw it, something enormous and pale, standing utterly still. Its shape was that of a reindeer, yet its antlers curved like the arms of a man. It faced him directly, eyes glowing a dull gold in the mist. No pupils, only hollow light and silence. Briggs stepped back, his hand tightening on the pistol. But in the blink of an eye, the figure dissolved into the fog, leaving only the whisper of snow. He turned back toward the house, heavy with dread. Smoke still drifted weakly from the broken chimney, thin, fragile, like the last breath of something that had finally gone to sleep. When Briggs started his truck and left the forest, a faint chime echoed through the air, distant, metallic, fading into nothing. Snow began to fall once more, and at the edge of the woods, fresh two-toed prints emerged on the white ground, pointing toward the village far beyond, where next winter would come again, and the Yule goat would return to collect its debt once more.